Please put your hands together for our next speakers, Joseph Mazzola, Director of Organizational Development and Performance Management for the City of McKinney, Texas, and Lola Isom, Human Resources Manager for the City of Salina, Texas. They will share with us how to create a fearless organization.
Hello, good afternoon, servant leaders. How is everyone today? Digesting, right? I hated to turn off those jams. We have the greatest DJ here, so loving that. Super excited to be here today with my good friend, Joe Mazzola. We are gonna be talking to you today about psychological safety and how to create a fearless organization, because that's what we all want, right? So with that, let's go ahead and dive on in. This is kind of our flow for the day. We're going to talk a little bit about who has inspired us to give this presentation and some studies and research that has been behind these topics to bring this forward to you today. We're going to talk about understanding psychological safety, how to recognize it. What does it look like? When you put it into practice, what is it that we're doing? And when you're truly performing, you're successful in psychological safety. What does that look like? We'll tie a bow on it and close on out for the day. Over to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Lola. Good afternoon, everyone, from the great city of McKinney, Texas, a community of 215,000 people about 30 minutes north. One of the things we want to start off before we get into the crux of our presentation is we want you to know that everything that Lola and I share with you this afternoon is grounded in research and comes from very credible sources. For example, Amy Edmondson is a professor at the Harvard Business School and the author of the Fearless Organization, which is one of the references that we use for the presentation. Another source that we turn to is named Timothy Clark, and as you can see on the slide there, his wheelhouse includes organizational culture and leadership, and we believe that psychological safety fits hand in glove and supports both of those. We also drew on a research project that Google did, and I know right now what you're all thinking, hey, that's Ron Holyfield in that picture, right? No, that's Aristotle. Although they're both great founding philosophers of Western philosophy, right? At any rate, they named it Project Aristotle, incidentally, because some people attribute this concept of synergy to Aristotle. The sum of the whole is greater than the parts. At any rate, one of the findings from their research project emphasize the importance of psychological safety. So we'll touch on that too. And then lastly, because this is a servant leadership conference, we tried to be mindful of presenting this in the context of Robert Greenleaf, the founder of the modern servant day leadership. And it's our opinion that psychological safety completely reinforces all of the concepts found in Dr. Robert Greenleaf's work and his seminal essay from 1970, The Servant as Leader. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lola, and she'll begin to define and map out what we're talking about with this thing called psychological safety.
All right, thank you, Joe. So we're going to check our understanding a little bit, kind of see where we are today in terms of knowing what it is, right? So to do this, we're going to do a little exercise that I'd like you all to participate in. What I'm going to do is read out a statement, and I simply want you to tell me whether or not it's true or false by a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So let's just see where we are today. Statement number 1. Psychological safety increases engagement. Thumbs up or a thumbs down? Yes, it is true. Good job, y'all. All right, next up. When leaders show vulnerability, it reduces psychological safety. True or false? You guys got it. False. Vulnerability is a huge component to psychological safety, and we'll talk more about that later today. Fostering psychological safety leads to constructive debate. True or false? Y'all got it. It's true. Very good. So hopefully that kind of gives us a little idea of kind of where we are in terms of psychological safety. Before we dive into the content itself, we have to make sure we know how to define psychological safety. We've got this kind of mindset from Socrates that all understanding begins with definition. And that's something I use quite often in training and presentations. We always want to be very clear what it is we're talking about, right? Because we speak different languages in our marriages, in our partnerships, relationships, teams, departments for sure, right? We speak different languages. So we want to define what it is we're talking about first. And to do that, we're going to use none other than Amy Edmondson. Her formal definition says, psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. A lot of stuff going on there, but basically what that's saying is that psychological safety gives us the ability to be our authentic selves, right? We can act naturally like we normally would in any setting, right? We would ask questions maybe or offer input, different ideas. So we're able to be our authentic selves. Over to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Lola. Now keep in mind everything that Lola just shared with you helps to satisfy some of our basic human needs. For example, if we looked at Maslow's hierarchy here, it's crystal clear and obvious that it satisfies our fundamental need for safety and security, but it even goes beyond that. Psychological safety helps address some higher level needs that all of us have too. The need to belong, the need to have healthy relationships, the need to feel that my voice matters, or better yet, that I matter, and the need to sort of accomplish something. So all of this fits hand in glove with motivational needs and certain needs that all of us have, and all that is important to us as leaders, obviously, to bring out the best of our employees. Now, Lola defined what psychological safety is, referring to the good work of Amy Edmondson, and then we looked at how it bridges and links over to basic needs that we have. We also think it's important, before going deeper into the presentation, to explain what psychological safety is not. It is not about being caring or being nice, although that's important. It is not about being extroverted or introverted. That's something we have no control over. Lola's very extroverted. I'm a little more reserved and introverted. We can both create psychological safety. It's not synonymous with the word trust, although they kind of go together. Think of it this way. Trust is future-focused, and trust is typically one-on-one, whereas psychological safety is in the here and now, and it's centered more on groups or teams. Psychological safety doesn't mean that there's no accountability, and it doesn't mean that there are lower standards in the workplace. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes because it's so darn important, knowing that all of you are in the excellence business. And then the other thing to mention is that psychological safety in and of itself is not enough to lead to high performance or excellence. The way I like to put it is basically psychological safety sets the table, but you still have to serve the main course when it comes to effective leadership to lead to high performance and excellence in the organization.
Okay, so to illustrate psychological safety and how we recognize it, I'm going to share with you the 4 stages of psychological safety by Dr. Timothy Clark. Now, Clark describes this progression through the stages as a universal path of the natural progression of human needs in a social setting. So what's interesting about that is it's universal, right? These are the human needs and the progression they go through in social settings. Now, before I take you through these stages, I want to be clear about something that Clark says in his study. He says that before we are included in something, by default, we are excluded, right? It's pretty simple stuff, right? But it's up to the people inside the circle, right, to bring us in, to make us feel that sense of belonging, which is where we can cross into the first threshold of inclusion safety, where we feel valued, right? We're being treated fairly. We're sharing experience and knowledge with one another. Again, it's up to the people inside that circle to bring us in and help us to feel included. Now, once we've crossed that off, we can move on to stage 2, which is the learning stage, or the learner. Now, what's interesting about this is we want to think about, how do we learn the best, right? We learn the best by making mistakes, right? If you think back on things that didn't work, it was a train wreck, that's when we learn the most, right? So are we giving our people the opportunity to make mistakes, to fail, to explore opportunities? Additionally, one of the things that I think is extremely important for leaders today, and actually Howson talked about this in his presentation this morning, is the importance of being genuinely curious, right? Do we really care about other people's perspectives and input that they're giving us, even if we don't agree with it, right? So let's kind of look at the alternate perspective of that, right? If I am one of those bosses that we've all had at some point, that's the end all be all, it's my way or the highway, can I be genuinely curious? Can I genuinely care about other people's input? No, because it's all me, right? So we want to think about how we can practice that curiosity along the way, because we all have the desire to learn and grow. So if we've crossed off the inclusion stage and we've moved on to the learning stage, next up, we can get into the collaborator stage, which Clark also refers to this as the contributor stage. Are you safe to contribute, right? To bring forward input or new ideas? Now, there's two things I want to talk about in this section. One of them being the importance of rewarding vulnerability. Are you rewarding vulnerability or are you punishing it, right? What does vulnerability look like? It could be asking questions, asking for help, giving feedback, apologizing. All of these acts of courage really need to be rewarded so that they're repeated, right? The other part of that, we want to make sure that we are being flexible, right? We're being flexible to the people that we're working with, right? We are making sure that everybody has a say in the room. So if we have crossed off the collaborator stage, then we can move on to the challenger stage. And he's very clear in this study in that once you transition from stage 3 to stage 4 of this progression, you're crossing the innovation threshold. Because in order to innovate, you have to challenge that status quo, right? You have to push the envelope. But first, you have to be given the environment to do that, right? So Clark says, it's very important that you are not a neutral party in psychological safety. You're creating culture by design and not by default. Over to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Lola. Now let's go back to Google for a minute. I mentioned earlier the research project centered on team performance, but we're sharing it because research suggests that we spend 50% more of our time today in a collaborative setting or working in teams than we did 20 years ago. That's just how we do things in the modern workplace. In the city of McKinney, where I work, we have an executive leadership team that meets every other week like clockwork. Every one of our departments has a department leadership team. Monday of this week, we had our Leadership Academy, 3 teams from that group that shared some recommendations on what we could do to improve the city, and they took that to the executive team. So we live in a world that's team-centered. So this is important. Well, Google knew that, and they were trying to crack the code on why it is that some teams flourish and other teams flounder. So they did this long-term project, and at the end of or going into the project, they thought, well, this is easy. What you do is simply stack the deck. You get the smartest people in the world, you put them on the team, and that's your recipe for success. Not so fast. That's not what the research showed. What the research showed is that there is a very short list of conditions that have to be in place for teams to flourish. For example, you have to assign tasks that are meaningful, that resonate with the participants. There has to be some structure. There has to be crystal clear roles and responsibilities that are defined. There has to be a goal that they're working for. There have to be clearly defined deliverables, etc. But here's the takeaway. The #1 driver of team success based on the Google study was that you had to have psychological safety to unleash the creativity, to release the idea sharing without fear of being ridiculed or punished or made to feel foolish, etc. So that's an important takeaway, and this is really kind of a nice checklist for you when you're putting teams together back in your cities. Well, back to you.
Okay, you got it. So practicing, right? What does this look like? How do we do it? So the way we're going to illustrate this for you is we've got the first slide coming up that's going to show you how to practice psychological safety for an individual leader. The second slide after that will be for the team. They're a little bit different, but we want to kind of show it to you a little bit differently. So first up, for the leader, how do we practice psychological safety? #1, what I think is the most important thing, not only for psychological safety, but also for professional and personal development and growth, be self-aware, right? Do you know your own tendencies, your behaviors, how you tend to respond and react? And do you know them so well that you can stop them before they happen so that you can continue to foster a psychologically safe environment where people can thrive? Do you show that concern for others, right? We're kind of back to that authenticity and being genuine. You can't fake that stuff, right? We've all seen people try. Are you showing a genuine concern for others? Do you value and appreciate the ideas that people bring forward to you, even if you don't agree with them, right? That is huge. The worst thing you can do is tell somebody something is a bad idea and not tell them why, right? You want to make sure that people feel valued with their contributions and that it's meaningful, even if you don't agree or go in that direction. Explain change, right? Change is happening 1,000 miles an hour in every direction. And so much of that is not in our control, but some of it is, right? So if we think about things like software implementations or big initiatives like that, when we know things are coming, are we explaining the change before it happens and the why behind it? Provide multiple avenues for dialogue. In this room, I'm sure I have my emailers, my texters, my IMers, my in-person people. We all have different preferences in how we want to communicate with people. As leaders, we have to make sure that we're open to all of that so that people on our teams feel comfortable to contribute in the way that's natural to them. Do you foster cognitive diversity, right? The worst thing we can have is a team full of people that all think the same. We're not going to get very far. We're not going to have alternate perspectives. We want to have that diversity in our teams. And of course, the clarity and expectations is very important. So that's for the individual. Now let's take a look at the team. For the team, collaboration, right? We've talked about that in several presentations today. Additionally, in the 4 stages of psychological safety by Dr. Clark, we talked about that as well. But one thing I want to highlight in terms of collaboration is collaboration can happen by chance, right? It can happen at a surprise in the hallway. You're talking about something and then you start collaborating with folks and you're iterating before you know it, and it's really cool and really fun. Don't stop that. Keep that going. But are you also facilitating psychological safety to happen, right? Facilitating collaboration to happen, I mean. Are you doing that? Are you setting the stage so that people can collaborate? Genuine curiosity, we talked about that. The free exchange of ideas, right? On a team, you all know the best teams are the ones that you can kind of bounce stuff back and forth and you're free to do so without judgment or punishment. Ask for team input. As leaders, we have to drop that veil of the I know everything, right? And have to realize that operating with one brain in the organization, as opposed to tapping into the talent of everybody else in the organization and asking for their input, that's the more powerful one, right? Healthy conflict, right? Are we able to, bring things up that's an alternate perspective, and that's okay, right? No matter who the person is that you're bringing it up to. Busting out of groupthink and productive disagreement. Over to Joe.
Thank you, Lola.
You're
Thank
welcome.
We want to peel back the onion just 2 more layers with you, so we're almost done. And the last 2 items we want to share with you go directly to the heart of servant-based leadership, and which is why we're here. First, I'd like to summarize the 3 key steps for you to keep in mind as a servant leader when it comes to fostering and reinforcing psychological safety. Think of it as a psychological safety leadership checklist, right? First of all, you want to set the stage, or you want to open up the door for people to feel free to communicate and offer their ideas, etc. In other words, you just want to let them know that you're facing a challenge. I don't have the answer. I need some help. We're struggling with an issue here, etc. So you want to open up the stage. And part of that is also going back to what Lola mentioned earlier about fear of failure. And a lot of people say we celebrate failure. I think that's kind of an awkward way to put it. I'd like to suggest that you act as a leader to destigmatize failure, putting in place some guardrails or some guiding principles. In other words, it's okay to fail so long as the intentions were right, you weren't cutting corners or being lazy, so long as you admit it, so long as you fix it, so long as you learn from it, so long as you don't repeat it, etc. So addressing failure right up front sets the stage nicely to open up that door for psychological safety. The other thing you want to do is be proactive. You don't want to be passive when it comes to it. I have an open door policy, that's passive. walking around talking to people face to face, asking how they're doing, that's active. So you want to be proactive, in essence, making it almost impossible or difficult for people just to muzzle up and not contribute. The secret weapon here is asking powerful, open-ended questions, questions you can't answer with a yes or a no, and getting dialogue going and exchange going. Lola, you've worked at the city of Salina now for 3 months. Do you like it?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Lola, you've worked at the city now for 3 months. Tell me the 3 things you like most about it, Lola. Aha.
Yes.
What are 3 things that frustrate you, Lola, about this new? What could we have done to make the transition easier for you as a new employee? So there you're getting past the yes or no answers and creating some dialogue. And again, it's opening up the door for that free exchange between you and your fellow employees. And then the other thing that you want to do as a leader is the key step number 3 here is you want to respond appropriately. And as you can see in the slide, that means you don't shoot the messenger. If that's done, you slam the door closed for creativity and risk-taking, etc., and there's no going back. There's no going back. The second thing we wanted to share with you that we think is important for you as a leader, and an important way to look at it, is this grid that looks at psychological safety relative to the standards that you put in place in the workforce. So I'll walk through all 4 of these quadrants very quickly. We'll start up in the upper left corner there. Here you've got low psychological safety, and you've got high psychological safety, but low standards. That's called the comfort zone. The employees show up on time, they don't rock the boat, they don't create problems, there's a lot of chatter coming out of the break room and laughter, etc., but a whole lot of room to improve when it comes to operations, customer service, etc. That's because the standards are low in the organization. That's not leadership. So let's drop down to the apathy zone. Here you've got low standards, and you overlay that with low psychological safety. Here the employees don't care, they're sleepwalking. And truth be known, they're waiting for something better to come along and then they jump ship. That's not leadership. Now let's go lower right, and now you're in the so-called anxiety zone, where you've got high standards, low psychological safety, and the employees are all walking on eggshells. I'm not going to say anything to Joe. He'll take my head off. In fact, when I see Joe walking down the sidewalk, I'll cross the street so I don't have to meet him, right? That's the zone that I think some of us can relate to from personal experience, maybe back in the day. That's the zone where I think Robert Greenleaf would have the most heartache, because that's the exact opposite of leadership, effective servant leadership. Okay, now let's go top right. Here we're in the learning and high performance zone. Here you've got the right mix of high psychological safety and very high standards and accountability. That's the zone that we want to be in to do the very best thing possible for the communities that we serve. So Lola is going to begin to take us home here, and we've built in plenty of time to take your questions.
All right, so let's tie a little bow on it with another knowledge check. So we're going to see how we do at the kind of latter end of our presentation here. Same thing, thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false. Let's see how we do. All right, psychological safety is another word for trust. True or false? Got kind of a mixed on this one. It's false. They're very closely related, but not synonymous. All right, Robert Greenleaf founded the modern-day servant leadership movement. Everybody in the room? Yes, all right, that's true, good job. All right, the 4 stages of psychological safety are inclusion, learning, collaborating, and challenging. True or false? True, good. Couple more. Psychological safety improves with less diversity in teams. True or false? Oh, I got a real hard no on that one. False, correct. All right, high standards and low psychological safety equals the anxiety zone. True or false? True. So if you've got really high standards and no psychological safety or very low, people are going to be freaking out. All right, psychological safety encourages creativity and new ideas. Good, that is true. All right, over to Joe.
Okay, thanks, Lola.
Yes.
All right, so just to recap what we've covered with you all real briefly here is we explained to you the sources that we drew from It didn't come from napkin notes or Joe's hunch of the world or Lola's perception of the world. We also talked about the definitions, what psychological safety is, what it isn't, and how it relates to basic human needs. We also talked to you about the different stages. Lola walked you through Clark's 4 stages. And incidentally, it's not on the slide, but I talked a little bit about the Project Aristotle, Google study of team dynamics, with the takeaway being that the #1 driver of team success is psychological safety. Next, Lola shared with you some concrete examples of what leaders can pay attention to versus what the teams can pay attention to. And I summarized in the so-called leadership checklist 3 key steps that you need to pay attention to. And then we talked about the 4 different zones, of course, with the foot stomper being get up in that high performance and learning zone with high psychological safety coupled with high standards. And then Lola did some kind of fun, easy peasy knowledge checks along the way just to kind of make sure that we were summarizing a few of the key points throughout the presentation. With that, she's just going to close with a quote from Robert Greenleaf, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Yes, thank you, Joe. All right, so to end off, I'm going to share a quote. The work exists for the person as much as the person exists for the work. Put another way, the business exists as much to provide meaningful work to the person as it exists to provide a product or service to the customer. So basically, it is just as important to take care of our people inside of the organization, provide meaning to their work, show that they have value, as it is to provide the best service as we can to our customers. And Joe and I think that psychological safety is how we can get there. All right, thank y'all. And we will be happy to take any questions. So, and again, I can't see like anybody else, so I will do my best to look around.
Got one coming over here.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Doug.
How do you test your organization if it does or doesn't have psychological safety? Because I'm assuming if you're in a toxic workforce and you give an employee satisfaction survey, they may not participate for fear of whatever, you know?
Yeah, I can take a little bit of that, and then maybe if you want to kind of chime in. I think it's just evident in behaviors, right? So the thing I think of is we've all been in those meetings, whatever it is, a project, an initiative, where we're talking about something and working our way through something, but nobody is offering a different opinion. Everybody's agreeing all the time, right? It's always yes, yes, yes. There's no pushing back. There's no challenging. That to me is evident that there's a problem there. So that's kind of a real behavior thing. I think kind of just being in the moment and assessing behaviors is a big part of it. Joe, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would, we do engagement surveys and try to get to the heart of it. The last time we did engagement, we're going to do another one here in August. The last time we did it, we had 4,500 written comments. So we had all the raw data, but then there you can tease a lot of information out of those anonymous written comments when you do your annual work environment surveys and such. The other thing is quality training programs and quality leadership development programs. Get it out on the table, explain what it is, talk about why it's important, talk about the things that get in the way of psychological safety, et cetera. So those are some things you do. And I don't want to get into the definition of pornography from the Supreme Court, but it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it, kind of thing, right? You can walk into a room and you can cut it with a knife if everybody's kind of on tension. Oh man, Joe just walked in the room. Everybody sort of changes their expression and muzzles up. So it's kind of a fuzzy thing, but I think astute people can figure out is this department head opening up the door for healthy dialogue or not?
Good.
Good question, though. Very
Yes,
good question.
very good
Thank
question.
you.
Anybody else?
Oh, there's a hand over here, I see.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could touch on psychological safety in the elected officials. I don't know if you've tried to get that into the dialogue. So much of their work is done in public. And so the idea of having free-for-all discussion or discussion where you might be able to embarrass yourself. And I'm not seeing a lot of psychological safety in the public realm for elected, our councils, our boards.
That's a really good question. I personally have not had any encounter with that. I don't know if Joe has.
Well, we all probably have internal core organizational values. I mean, we do in McKinney. I'm just assuming you do too. Ours are respect, integrity, service, and excellence, which certainly support psychological safety. And our elected officials have a code of ethics that sort of tap dances a little bit around that, et cetera. But we stay out of kind of those kinds of guidelines for our elected officials, and we kind of focus on the work of our organization. You know what I'm talking about there. So, having said that, the elected officials can see a change taking place in an organization when the culture gets healthier and how that carries over to better customer service and more responsiveness and higher retention rates. They can see some of those data points. And even though it's maybe not an in-your-face approach to sort of have them maybe look a little internal about how they run a council meeting, it does have an impact on them. So no direct, but maybe there's a dotted line from the internal organization's approach to psychological safety to the elected officials' view of that. Good point.
Good question. Anybody else?
Just a couple over here. This
Okay.
passing.
So you talked about the apathy zone. What would you recommend for leaders or people in an organization when they're stuck in that apathy zone, maybe have a team that has given up on kind of trying out new things, of helping them to kind of, what first steps would you take to kind of break them out of that apathetic zone?
Well, that's a reflection of weak leadership, in my opinion, and you can't just flip a light switch and change that. That's got to be baby steps back. And the most important thing that the leader can do is let them know that you're listening. You genuinely listen and then act on it. For example, if your engagement survey says we've got a problem in this area, you need to be full disclosure, full transparency. We're going to take that on. We're going to do something about that. So I would say it's a tedious road to dig out of that hole, but not impossible. And you have to do it in baby steps. And you have to show and demonstrate tangible ways that their contribution is heard, it's acted upon, and it makes sense. By the way, psychological safety does not mean you say yes to everything. You've got to sanity check it, right? You've got to drill down deeper into unintended consequences and a whole bunch of other dynamics. So it doesn't mean you just acquiesce and give them the keys to the car. So baby steps would be back, tangible examples of how you listen and how you've acted on the recommendations from the employees. Another very good question. Anything to add to that, Lola?
No, the only thing I was thinking of was just rewarding vulnerability, right? Kind of went in tune with what you were saying, but it takes a vulnerability in a team or in a leader to say, hey, I've got a team that's in that apathy zone, right? What do I do about it? That might not look good on the leader per se, but it is showing vulnerability, which is what we want in the organization, to open up those dialogues of conversation and those channels that we want open.
Yeah. And we know from the work of Brene Brown and Patrick Lencioni and a lot of other experts about the power of vulnerability. And for men, get over it. You've got to open up the kimono and say, I don't have the answers. And it's not a sign of weakness. And the leader sets the stage that it's okay by showing that vulnerability. So you've got to take that first step as the leader. And then there's a cascading effect where the employees themselves will kind of jump on the bandwagon and feel more at ease to open up. Any other questions that we might be able to answer for you?
Okay. Well, with
Thank you
that,
very much.
thank y'all so
Appreciate it.
much.
Thanks so
Enjoy
much.
the rest of your time.